The air in the hallway felt colder than usual. I hadn't even taken off my coat when Mia from HR found me, eyes wide, voice flat. "Celine wants to see you. Now." I followed her silently past the posters lining the corridor. Campaigns I had built directed saved from failure. My name wasn't on any of them, but I remembered the long nights, the redos, the rewrites. I adjusted my collar and stepped through the conference room door. Celine Carr sat at the head of the table, impeccable as ever. Graham, the CFO, was beside her, thumbing through his tablet. And to the left, Malik Vance, our new VP of Operational Clarity, as he liked to call it. The seat across from them was empty. I took it. Ela Celine began, her voice syrupy smooth. "First, I want to thank you. What you've built here is foundational." A folder slid across the glass. My name was printed on the tab. I didn't open it. I already knew. "We're realigning the creative department to support our long-term objectives," she continued. "That includes a compensation recalibration. You'll see the details inside, 60%. That was the number. From $98, $200 to just over $39,000, starting next month." Graham didn't even glance up. Malik leaned back and smiled like a banker denying a loan. "You should be grateful, honestly. Most roles didn't make it through the restructure at all." Grateful. I looked at the folder, then at them. Celine's hands were folded, her expression patient, like she was doing me a favor. "Take your time reviewing," she said. "We'll need your decision by Friday." I nodded once. Then I stood tucking the folder under my arm. "Thank you," I said calmly. This conversation was clarifying. None of them responded. None of them needed to. They thought I would go home and cry. They thought I would bend, beg, break. But as I walked back down the hallway past the framed campaigns that bore no trace of me, I was already making a silent list in my head of files to retrieve, of contracts, to review, of systems I had built on my own time. They thought they were trimming fat. They didn't realize they'd just severed the wrong nerve. I sat in the car with the envelope unopened beside me. I didn't need to look again. The number was already carved into my mind, 60%. They hadn't just cut my pay. They'd measured my worth and trimmed it like a spreadsheet row. The engine was off, but I didn't move. My hands rested on the wheel, fingers cold. Rain tapped gently on the windshield. 7 years. 7 years of showing up before sunrise, staying past, closing, filling in gaps no one saw until someone else took credit. I remembered the first time we landed a national brand. I'd stayed until 3 a.m. for 3 nights straight, fixing a final cut our junior editor had deleted by accident. When the campaign hit, it was a triumph of executive direction. I wasn't even invited to the dinner. Still, I stayed. For the health insurance, for the stability, for Zoe. I'd watched other people get raises, titles, features. I stayed because I couldn't afford not to. Zoe's asthma meant unpredictable doctor visits, co-pays stacked against grocery lists and heating bills, negotiated with overtime. They knew that. They used that. I drove home slowly, the folder tucked on the passenger seat like it might bite. By the time I stepped through the door, Zoe was in her pajamas, feet dangling from the couch. "Mom," she said brightly, "I made you something." She held out a drawing 2 stick figures under a rainbow. In pink bubble letters, the words, "You are strong." I took it in both hands and stared. Something cracked, not from pain, but from clarity. I had been told I was lucky to have a seat, but I'd been building the table for years. I'd built it quietly late at night while the world assumed I was sleeping or spent. After Zoe went to bed, I pulled the step stool from the pantry and reached into the top cabinet. Behind the tax folders, I found it. My old external drive scuffed at the edges, blue tape still wrapped around the USB cable. Inside it were files that didn't belong to them. Not then, not now, not ever. The house was still. Zoe's breathing had finally settled into a soft rhythm behind her bedroom door. I sat at the kitchen table, the old drive humming quietly beside my laptop. On the screen, folders opened like forgotten drawers, sketches, drafts, flow charts, iterations of a tool I once thought might be too ambitious to finish. Nightwing. I clicked through subfolders, each labeled with shorthand. Only I would understand N4 color drift map prompt engine V2. The deeper I went, the more I remembered how much of myself had gone into this. It wasn't just a tool, it was a system. A way to fix everything that made our workflow chaotic and wasteful. A way to do better, faster, smarter, with integrity. I opened a document titled Original Triggers. At the top was a date 3 years ago, and below it a list of behavior models. Time-stamped, version-controlled, all saved locally, never once synced to the company's server. I reached for the drawer where I kept old paperwork and pulled out my employee contract. Page after page of corporate legalese. I scanned until I found it. All intellectual property developed using company resources and within standard operating hours shall be considered property of Crestonfield Creative. I read that line 3 times, then again more slowly. Using company resources within standard hours. I laughed once, quiet sharp, because almost everything I built was coded at 2:14 a.m. in my apartment, during inhaler sessions, after fever spikes, while sitting cross-legged on the floor with Zoe sleeping beside me. No company laptop. No office Wi-Fi. Just my old personal machine and a second-hand tablet with a cracked screen. I opened the side drawer and pulled out a small notebook worn at the edges. On the back cover, a wireframe sketch, and just above the margin, Zoe's glitter pen doodles. A flower, a lopsided sun. They didn't own this. They had no idea what they'd overlooked. And now I wasn't just rereading a contract, I was building a case. The first sketch was done on the back of a pharmacy receipt. We were in the car waiting out a thunderstorm. Zoe had just come out of an appointment, her breathing raspy, her eyelids heavy. I gave her my phone so she could watch cartoons, and I sat in the front seat watching raindrops crawl down the windshield. I was thinking about how broken everything felt, how many hours we wasted at work revising campaigns that never should have left the draft phase. I pulled a pen from my bag and started mapping out something simple, a way to reduce unnecessary edits through smart prompts. By the time the storm let up, the page was full. That night, I opened a blank file on my old laptop and wrote the word Nightwing. It started small, an adaptive engine for content flow, but I couldn't stop. Every time I sat down, it grew. I trained the system on my own writing samples, teaching it to recognize tone intent fatigue. I built logic branches, modular variation, pools, even emotional mapping. I didn't know it then, but I was creating a second brain one that didn't burn out, didn't forget, didn't ask for credit. I shared it quietly with friends in freelance circles, writers, designers, developers. I called it a test, but their reactions said more. This feels like it knows me. Faster than anything I've used. Are you selling this yet? I wasn't. Not yet. I didn't want money. I wanted proof. So I saved every version, every change, every comment. I filmed screen captures of updates. I kept a changelog. I treated it like evidence. Months later, when I showed Quentin Vega, an IP attorney, I trusted he said 3 words, I'll never forget. You need protection. We filed a provisional patent within the week. By the time Crestonfield called me in to slash my salary, Nightwing wasn't just alive. It was shielded. I closed my laptop and looked across the room. Zoe was curled up on the couch, breathing easy for once. On the screen behind her, Nightwing's dashboard glowed steady in the dark. I hadn't worn the blazer in over a year. It still held the faint scent of anxiety and dry cleaner starch. I put it on anyway. Red lipstick followed sharp intentional. My spine straightened without effort. At 9:28 a.m., I walked into the Crestonfield lobby, heels echoing across tile I used to scrub with my eyes when I came in early to set the tone. Today I wasn't early. I was exactly on time for myself. The receptionist blinked. Celine's in a meeting, she offered. I know I said already walking. The glass doors to the conference room parted around my shoulders. 5 faces turned to me. Celine, Graham, Malik. 2 new suits I didn't recognize, legal, probably. We're in the middle of something, Celine snapped. "This won't take long," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a black envelope. No words, no preamble. I placed it in front of her like a dealer laying down the final card. She stared at it, then at me. "What is this?" she asked. "A licensing agreement," I said, "for the continued use of Nightwing." Graham laughed a sound without weight. "You mean your tool sets? The ones you developed while working here? They belong to Crestonfield, Celine." Added smoothly. I didn't flinch. "Per your contract," I said evenly, "intellectual property developed using company resources during standard hours belongs to Crestonfield. Nightwing was built off-site, off hours, on my equipment." I pulled a second envelope from my bag. Inside, you'll find documentation timestamps, backups, source files, handwritten notes. I flipped to one page in particular and slid it across the table. A wireframe sketched in black pen. Along the margin, a child's glitter doodle, a lopsided heart, and a star. Zoe's hand. My moment. Malik leaned back, silent. One of the lawyers cleared his throat and said nothing. "The licensing fee is outlined on page 2, I added. "Monthly. Or you're welcome to rebuild your internal systems from scratch." Celine narrowed her eyes. "You're bluffing." "Then don't sign," I said. "But just so you know, Nova Labs already has." I turned, walked out, heels clicking like punctuation. By noon, the emails started. First from HR, thinly disguised as a clarification request. Then one from Graham asking if I had a few minutes to talk through the terms more collaboratively. A follow-up from legal arrived an hour later, full of vague language about mutual understanding and interim bridge options. They weren't ready to negotiate. They were buying time. I ignored them all. By evening, Quentin called. His tone was light, but I could hear the satisfaction in it. "They're rattled," he said. "Legal reviewed your packet. Every timestamp, every asset, every file line airtight. They have nowhere to stand." I leaned back on the couch, watching Zoe sort stickers into color-coded piles. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was balancing on the edge of something. I felt centered, tethered. "They'll try to bluff," he added, "then stall, then panic." He wasn't wrong. The next morning, I got an email from Ava Rios, a junior strategist who used to sit 2 cubicles over. We'd barely spoken beyond polite nods, but she must have remembered more than I realized. Subject, just a heads-up body. "They're trying to rebuild Nightwing. Malik's pushing the dev team to reverse engineer it. It's messy. People are nervous. Thought you should know." I read it twice, then again. My stomach didn't twist with fear. It clenched with quiet rage. Of course Malik would try to salvage power through replication. He never cared about innovation, only control. I forwarded the email to Quentin. He replied within minutes. Classic. "They'll argue derivative work. But they're on thin ice. You didn't just build a tool, you built a system, a logic flow, a fingerprint. They copy it, they violate patent law, full stop." I opened my laptop and clicked into the Nightwing Foundations folder. Not just code, but reasoning, triggers, architecture, the spine of something living. They could chase the shadow all they wanted, but the light was already behind me. The community center lobby was loud in the way only community spaces could be. Sneakers squeaking, vending machine, humming, a toddler shouting about a juice box like it was life or death. I sat on a bench near the practice room, phone in hand, pretending to scroll mindlessly through headlines. Then I saw the subject line, "Offer confirmation, Ardent Labs." My breath caught. I tapped the email open. "Illa, we're thrilled to formally offer you the position of Chief Vision Officer at Ardent Labs. Starting salary, $182,000. Signing bonus, $20,000 full creative autonomy over your innovation pipeline." I blinked, then blinked again. The words didn't move. A quiet laugh slipped out before I could stop it. The sound startled me. Sharp, unguarded, real. Zoe came flying down the hallway, music sheets fluttering in her hand. "Mom," you're doing the squinty smile. "That means something good happened." I held out my arms. She crashed into me. Does this mean she asked muffled against my shoulder we can finally get the good cereal again? I pulled back just enough to look at her. Zoe, I said we can afford the whole aisle. We left with sticky fingers and an untouched vending machine snack. At home, while she practiced again in the living room, I sat at the kitchen table and reread the email. Ardent wasn't just any company, they were the quiet force behind half the tech startups that suddenly worked. They were whispered about at investor dinners. They were known for seeing brilliance before it got buried, and they'd seen me. I pulled out a fresh notebook and started sketching Nightwing's next phase expansion modules, creator networks, adaptive feedback loops. The page filled fast like it had been waiting for this kind of light. Zoe's piano slowed in the next room, softening to a hum. I wrote down one last phrase in bold ink: build forward, never back. A month later, I didn't need to wait until 2 a.m. to create anything. My hours belonged to me now. My calendar wasn't crowded with performative check-ins or status meetings that went nowhere. It was full of strategy iteration, actual build time. The kind that mattered. The first time I walked into my new office at Ardent Labs, I paused, not because it was big, but because it was open. Sunlight spilled across digital whiteboards already pulsing with ideas. No cubicles, no hidden corners, just room to breathe. And people who ask questions to understand, not to compete. When I introduced Nightwing to the team, they didn't blink at the depth. They leaned in. Within 2 weeks, we'd spun up a full development pod and mapped out the next 3 release cycles. I watched as logic flows I'd once drawn on napkins took shape in real-time simulations, faster than I ever imagined. Clients, big ones, started flying in, not to interrogate, but to learn. The same companies that once brushed off my emails now sent entire teams to sit across from me, notebooks in hand. Ava joined my team in week 3. I didn't ask why she left Crestonfield. She didn't need to explain. The day she saw her name on a patent filing for a new adaptive module she helped design, she stood frozen in front of the screen. Then she sat down and cried. Not loud, not broken, just a slow, quiet release, like something had been locked inside her for years and finally had permission to move. I didn't interrupt. I just handed her a water bottle and kept working. Nightwing wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a standard. It was being written into client contracts as a non-negotiable. Competitors were scrambling to replicate the experience it created. Empathy-driven automation, responsive variation mapping, real-time adaptation without stripping human voice. Every feature was something I once had to justify. Now they were asking how soon they could get more. I came home late that night, laptop under my arm, a new prototype open in the corner. Zoe was already asleep, her science project taped to the fridge behind her. 59 days after I walked out of Crestonfield with an envelope they hadn't seen coming, I walked back in through the front doors this time as someone they couldn't ignore. Elijah Tang from Ardent walked beside me, tablet in hand, sleeves rolled. His pace was casual, mine was deliberate. The receptionist didn't recognize me at first. The security badge said, Executive Guest. The title felt foreign, then strangely correct. The boardroom hadn't changed. Same cold glass table, same oversized wall monitor, but the faces around it were different. Celine was gone. Malik, too. Press releases had framed it as strategic transitions. I knew better. They'd been cut out like bad code. Graham was still there, looking grayer, smaller. Around him sat 2 board members I didn't recognize, and a woman with a hard jawline who introduced herself as interim CEO. The air smelled like damage control. We're prepared to move forward on the deal, Elijah said, passing around the due diligence summary. Brand equity is intact, but our concern lies with internal IP activity. I stepped forward, placing a folder at the center of the table. Specifically, I said we're aware that attempts were made to replicate Nightwing after licensing discussions began. That was addressed. Graham interjected, already defensive. It was an overstep by a team lead, contained internally. I didn't respond. I walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. I wrote in clean, unshaking lines. Creativity thrives when it's respected. Then I turned. If Nightwing is touched again, rebuilt, mirrored, cloned, the deal ends. Period. We don't build in theft's shadow. A long silence followed. The interim CEO nodded once. One of the board members tapped a pen against his notebook without speaking. Graham didn't look up again. Elijah glanced at me and gave the smallest smile. Outside, the air was warmer, lighter. We didn't speak until we were in the elevator. "You still want to go through with it?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "but only if I lead the integration." He chuckled. "I was hoping you'd say that." That night, Zoe and I sat on the couch with Thai takeout and chocolate milkshakes, her legs tucked under mine. The house was quiet. Zoe had finally fallen asleep, arms curled around her favorite blanket, one leg kicked out of the covers as usual. I stood at her doorway a while longer than I needed to, watching the soft rise and fall of her breathing. Downstairs, the glow from my desk pulled me back. A fresh draft of the proposal was open on the screen. The Heart Fellowship, a funding initiative for women in tech balancing innovation and caregiving. It was just a working title, but the purpose was already solid. Resources, mentorship, seed grants, everything I'd once needed but never had. Everything I used to believe I didn't deserve unless I sacrificed something first. I sat down reading through the final paragraph again. I'd added a footnote at the bottom about where the first round of funding would come from Ardent's equity return from the Crest acquisition. It felt right, cyclical, correct. My nameplate caught the corner of my eye. Ela Hart, Director of Innovation, Ardent and Crest Division. The brass was warm under the lamplight, understated but firm. I remembered when I used to sit in windowless rooms squinting through fluorescent flicker while someone explained my own work back to me. I remembered being called a key asset one day and non-essential the next. I remembered watching my credit be rerouted mid-meeting without a single objection from the table. And then I remembered the first time someone in my new team stood up and said, "That was Ila's architecture, we just scaled it." I had to excuse myself that day. Now I oversaw 2 research teams. Nightwing had grown into a modular suite with live client learning, creative AI ethics embedded into its core, and a licensing pipeline 3 months deep. More than half my team were women who'd walked out of toxic companies and into something that finally looked like a future. Zoe asked me last week while eating cereal we didn't have to budget for Did You Win? I told her no. I changed the game, and tomorrow we'd start building the next level.